Hey ladies and gentlemen, today I'll be talking to you guys about the messed up history of autism. Now this has actually been technically getting on me for the past, I want to say 2 or 3 years. Well actually ever since I was born, because of the fact I was mistaken to have Asperger's. And that's, well, I'll get to a little bit later though. But as well, I want to also talk about the messed up origins of, well, autism. If you guys don't realize of how messed up autism history is, here's the thing. You pretty much might want to read a book. Especially not a modern American book, but a book that was technically written by Victorian scientists. Or Victorian physicians. That's right, we're technically talking about the, well, idiots known as, well, yeah, the Victorians. Now, I hear you guys already, but Templar, the Victorians were so helpful. Here's the thing, they're not. When it comes to the human mind, the Victorians were really, really stupid. And when I mean stupid, I mean just unbound levels of stupid. Here's the reason being this. If you guys actually ever heard the term autism, you pretty much think of a guy who pretty much is like, oh, I want to say, well, can't understand anything, he has bad motor skills, in the process he can't learn, read, or write. There's the point. In fact, autism is actually that accidental racial slur. And I am not joking. This is actually a racial slur that it was actually invented back in during the Victorian era just to call someone stupid. And here's the thing though. If you were technically to be working and such and you pissed off one of your coworkers, one of your coworkers can actually go as far as calling you the autistic. And in doing so, guess what might happen? That's right, your boss would technically call both of you in. In the process, this pamphlet sheet that they would end up, well, giving you would actually be the most messed up thing. Because here's the thing. If you were called autistic back then, you had to take this type of specialized exam in order to show if you were or were not autistic. Problem is though, these exams were meant to make you fail. In fact, they had some ridiculous, outlandish type of, well, just answers and questions that no one could even answer even still today. Such as, what is the like, kind of like this. Like, what is the measurement of 5q to the third power of 20th lateral? You see my point here, right? This is actually one of the most messed up questions, and as well, there are hundreds others that didn't help. In fact, you had to write these down. There was no bubble sheet back then. And in doing so, people got so confused in the process, if they didn't actually even finish it on time, then in the process they were actually labeled as autistic. And the messed up thing is, most of the time when we think of someone autistic, this is actually because it labels them as stupid. You see the point? In fact, namely this type of slang term came from either America or England. We still don't know which. But as well, England technically came up with the term retarded. In other words, if someone was to call you retarded back then, that's technically another labelization of stupid. So in other words, you're technically calling everyone stupid in the process. But here's the messed up thing. Many times over, if we were to actually study autism, it's kind of like if we were to study the human brain. And here's the thing, that's technically what many physicians were meant for. However, the study of the human brain is like, well, studying the human brain. You can't just study it. It's like, well, it's technically a human brain. You can't just study it. It's like your own universe. But now here's the messed up part in history though. Many times over, the Victorians would actually, well, or these Victorian physicians and scientists, what they would do is go as far as actually take people that just got off of a boat from another country. In other words, say if like here in the US, a physician was to take, say, a person from Africa or the Middle East, or including like Far Eastern Asia or anywhere. And in doing so, they were completely different with the social standing there. And in doing so, they didn't understand what the hell was going on. But as well, for them actually of their time, they would even pay them what you might call a low-wage ideal. In other words, technically the idealism would have been around $50, but in truth, they would only pay them like around $5 to $10. And that's technically skimming them. And here's the messed up thing though. They would go as far as to even state that these people were completely lacking their idealism that they did in the States. And here's the thing. if you're technically going to end up labeling somebody who pretty much doesn't know anything of what the hell goes on in your own country, you're pretty much going to end up, well, calling everybody autistic. But that's the thing though. Many people were called autistic just because of the fact they just got off a ferry or off of a boat. Just because they came from one side of the world than the other. In other words, it's kind of like just labeling everybody that's in one country autistic, while the other country calls you autistic just because you don't understand their point of view. In other words, there were different types of idealisms. In fact, sometimes they couldn't even speak proper English. Or as well, some people were so scared, and many of them were actually worried they'd be detained and sent back to their home country. So you could see why many people were so terrified by this. They kind of didn't want to actually even do this autism tests. In fact, they didn't technically call them autism tests, they just called them, well, the weirdest one that was actually labeled as was knowledge of science exam. And here's the thing, many people even thought that this was actually a career opportunity that they were just given right off the boat. Which, no it isn't. And which is probably why many people even still today kind of actually avoid this idiocy. But as well, many people still do this, unfortunately, and it's getting weird. And when I mean weird, I mean stupid. But now, that's not even the worst part. In fact, sometimes it's kind of like this. When we see autism, we actually see a guy who's on his own world. He doesn't want to talk to us. He is just messing around with his hands, or something else. Here's the thing. There is a difference between that autism and a real autism. Now, you guys don't understand why I'm saying that autism and real autism, because there is real autism out there. Problem is, though, the other autism is known as fake autism. In other words, an autism scare. Many people have actually been ridiculed with this, and unfortunately, just because that they're messing around with their hands, or as well they're in their own little world, doesn't mean that they have autism. In fact, here's the thing though. It's kind of like if we see a kid daydreaming after he finished a test. So what's going to happen? Well, this is what's going to happen. A principal or something like that's going to tell your parents that, well, your kid's got autism and I saw him playing around in his own little world. That's how it is. And unfortunately, that form of knowledge that we still believe in today, just because a kid is in his own little daydream, doesn't mean that he is autistic. In fact, episode from King of the Hill pretty much actually proves my point, seeing as though many regular kids were just taken from classes just because they were labeled to have autism, and just because of the fact they would even state the following: if they have autism, then technically they cannot take a super standardized test. In fact, that's actually another messed up thing. In fact, many schools, colleges, high schools, even at elementaries, or as even far as kindergarten, went as far as to actually putting the list label that if your kid has autism, they cannot take this stupid test. In other words, they kind of make a fake test just to actually understand which one has autism and which one doesn't. However, most of the time, these proved wrong. And unfortunately, they just threw people into a random class and treated them like a kid. Now, that's just completely stupid if you ask me. If you kind of end up putting somebody in autism classes, it's like technically putting anybody in autistic class, just because they're from a foreign country, or as well they don't understand an answer. And pretty much most of the time, people don't. It's kind of like also with the, well, messed up form of history. In fact, if I was to actually, say, go back in time and see the most messed up forms of ridicule and what they would say as autism, here's the thing, the massive list is huge. In fact, the list even included if you were homosexual. In fact, if you were labeled to be a homosexual, then you were technically labeled to actually be autistic. And that's really messed up, even in today's standards. Unfortunately, we didn't get rid of that until the 1960s, and that's saying something. But the worst part is, even the Germans would say that. But as well, it would even go as far as even saying that if you were a woman and you wanted the right to vote, here's the thing, you would even be labeled autistic. Or as well, if you were African American and you wanted the right to vote, you'd be labeled autistic. What's next? They're going to actually stop teenagers from, voting? See my point? Thing is, though, this actually goes as far as to getting so racist that many Americans, in the process, actually don't want to be anywhere near a psychiatrist. And in fact, many psychiatrists are still actually listening to many of these idiotic, well, I want to say, ideas of, well, greatness, but in truth, they're nothing more than bullshit. In fact, these bullshit theories are worse than ever, and unfortunately, many Americans are being, well, targeted just because of it. In fact, it's kind of like what might happen if we were to take, say, a regular white American and actually just place him somewhere, and he's pretty much bald, and he has a Confederate flag. Here's the thing, though. People would end up marking this guy as a neo-Nazi or something, or a Ku Klux Klan member, when in truth he might just be part of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, or as well a biker. You guys didn't think that part through now, did you? Thing is, though, autism is probably one of the most messed up things in American history and world history. Problem is, though, we're listening to Victorian bullshit on these theories, and unfortunately, many times over, many of these autisms aren't labeled as fake autisms. Unfortunately, though, there are so many of them that we can't actually read them all. And here's the thing, though. Try taking some guy off the street and bring him into a, well, area of a room, for example. You technically take him to a room, and here's the thing, you're sitting down on one end of a desk with a laptop and such and writing a book, and he's so nervous, he's technically acting as though he's autistic, when in truth, he's just a regular civilian. That's the messed up thing about the Victorian Europe. And here's the thing, during the Victorian era, many people were actually even technically stated to have autism franchise. In other words, if someone looked autistic, then they had to be autistic. It's kind of like that one scene when we look in Red Dead, for example. If none of you guys have played that, I advise you guys do for pretty much a bunch of fun reasons. But if you guys actually see the one area in which a con man is technically trying to get a bunch of people to sell their land, or pretty much because of the lead poisoning, here's the problem. Or arsenic, I think it was. Here's the problem. That's what it labels them as. In fact, just because they look autistic doesn't mean they're autistic. Just because they sound autistic doesn't mean they're autistic. In fact, autism is actually one of the forms that actually destroys the brain. In other words, it's kind of like as though you can't actually operate, say, using a pencil. Now, though there is forms of autism out there, but unfortunately, because of the Victorian era, we're kind of labeled with the idiocy. In fact, it's kind of like what we might see if we see Nazi Germany labeling, well, they did do this to Einstein. They actually labeled him with autism just because he was, well, a Jew, and pretty much because he didn't agree with the German theory on how the Earth was made. So you can see why this is probably the most idiotic thing in history. In fact, even the Darwin theory is actually viewed to be autistic. When in truth, I wouldn't go that far, but I would call it very stupid to believe that I have a tail protruding from my ass. You get my point, though. But now, here's another messed up theory. In fact, if many Victorian scientists were to come into today's light and saw our modern day evolution of, well, science, reading, and such, here's the thing. They would label us to be autistic. And I'm not kidding. In fact, if you didn't follow the term grammar rules, if you guys don't understand the grammar rules were pretty much of a type of way of socializing to everyone. And here's the thing, if you didn't follow them, guess what? You'd be labeled as autistic. You see my point here, right? But here's the thing, by the 1900s, pretty much most of them have already gotten rid of. However, there was a person that was across the sea in Germany known as the Nazi Party. And here's the thing, they even went as far as to going further into the autism ideal. In fact, one man is actually named after, well, technically, there is a type of autism that was named after none other than a type of German scientist. Now, here's the thing, what was his name? Well, it's known as Hans Asperger. Now, let that name ring in for a minute. Hans Asperger. That's right, Asperger's syndrome. Now, Asperger's is actually a German type of, well, messed up form of, I want to say, labeling. In fact, this type of, well, messed up form of labeling was actually placed on thousands of innocent people, most of them being foreigners and Jews. And this is actually the really messed up part, because even also, many people across the sea in America actually followed Hans Asperger's idealism, and in order to actually, well, fix people. In other words, they would technically either demand a human male, or go as far as to, well, you get the point. I'm not trying to get that graphic for YouTube's sake, but you get the point, though, why we need to fix this. In fact, I'm trying to make sure that this is YouTube friendly, because I need to actually spread this out to people before it's too late, seeing as though that many people and many physicians accidentally still read the same bullshit. Now, here's actually the most messed up part, though. Many times over, thousands of people were actually mistaken to have autism. And here's the thing, Hans Asperger went as far as to keep labeling people that were just Jews or foreigners who didn't understand the German way of life, or as well were cynically taken from their homes by the German military and placed down right in a concentration camp. How would you technically feel? You would technically feel nervous, you'd want to get out, you'd technically actually be looking all around just wanting to get the hell out of there. In truth, this is all the type of same syndromes that we see from Hans Asperger's labeling of Asperger's. You see my point, right? Thing is, though, Asperger's is probably one of the most messed up things that we actually label us people with. In fact, as I stated before, I was labeled with Asperger's. Here's the reason being. I was technically mistaken to have Asperger's syndrome when I was 6 years old. Reason being, my father had passed away, and in doing so, I fell into a deep depression. Now, imagine that, though. If I fell into a deep depression, guess what? People have mistaken me to have Asperger's, because that's another syndrome of Asperger's. But here's the thing, if a kid falls into a deep depression, guess what? There's nothing you can do. In fact, this affects everybody. In fact, it's almost as though if, say, like the play Hamlet, was to actually have Hamlet not act all mournful. In other words, what am I supposed to do? Not be mourning my own dead father? You see my point here, right? Unfortunately, though, my mother accidentally believed the, well, medical doctor, who pretty much went as far as saying I had Asperger's and I needed to take a special form of pills. These pills were known as the Asperger. I can't remember what they were, but I do know that they technically were supposed to label or technically alter the autism. Here's the problem, though. Those pills, most of the time, were nothing more than placebo effects. In other words, you technically just give it to a kid and tell them to act good. See my point? But here's the messed up thing. Many of those types of autisms were really labeling people. And unfortunately, because of my mother, she smothered me so much with love that she kind of accidentally made me also believe I had Asperger's, when in truth I didn't. Here's the reason being. I technically wasn't even allowed to socialize with many of my fellow, well, neighborhood kids because of the fact there were hardly any, and the only ones that were technically a couple of blocks down. In other words, my mother would technically follow me all the way towards the area, in which is kind of a bad thing to do. Or as well, she would even go as far as to even walk me home to and home from school, even though I would technically just live like half a mile from the school. You get my point here, right? But here's the thing, though. I was technically babied for most of my life up until I reached the age of 16. And by 16, my mother passed away. Now, don't get me wrong, I do still love her as much as anyone would. Problem is, though, you technically don't actually label someone with autism because people like my mother were actually in such, well, deep depression, or as well, technically they can believe anything. And that's the messed up thing. Many people did. And this was known as the autism scare. The autism scare was actually huge in technically around the 90s and including the early 2000s. And pretty much a lot of times over, many people such as former presidents and world leaders were even marked to have autism just to actually clarify that this can affect anybody. When in truth, it wasn't. It's kind of also like trying to say that both President Bush and including even former President Barack Obama have autism. You see my point here, right? But that's the thing, though. You can't just put a labeling on somebody. But let me get back to what I'm trying to say. But because of my mother actually saying that I had autism to everybody around me, my entire family believed it. And unfortunately, here's the thing. It wasn't true. In fact, all in all, many times over, people actually still believe I have autism in my own family, when in truth, I do not. And here's the thing, if you say that somebody has Asperger's or any form of autism, here's the thing, you're technically destroying their chances in getting a job. This is probably the most messed up thing, though. Many times over, many people actually, even in modern day colleges, still do the autism test just to see if you pass, and which is destroying American economy as well. You can see why this system is not working. But as well, another thing about the autism scare is that it's really messed up. When I mean really messed up, I mean messed up. Here's the reason being. Pretty much because of the autism scare, we still actually have many people who believe that you can get autism from anything. Unfortunately, many times over, they would actually target people who were technically given vaccines, or including even as far as even saying that people who were actually have, not using breast milk on their kids. In which, most of the time, those people couldn't even give milk. You get my point. This was actually the most messed up thing in history, and unfortunately, it's still going on. The thing is, though, the autism scare was actually so messed up, especially in the 90s, because of the new autism known as Asperger's, and which first came out in 1994. You see my point here, right? But here's the thing, though. Many people have been labeled with autism when they really don't have it. No, don't get me wrong. There is autism out there. But the thing is, we might want to actually do some research, real research, not Victorian or Nazi crap, and, well, get it right. Otherwise, the only thing we're going to end up doing is ruining our entire ecostructure around this. In other words, it's kind of like saying that, well, you have autism, you can't come in. See my point? Or as well, if you were born on autism, you were actually killed on sight. This was even as far as even in Nazi, communists, or as well any other place, such as Red China, Red Vietnam, North Korea, Russia, Germany, and everywhere else. And it's all started because of the Victorians who didn't understand the human brain. Now, I can hear you guys already. But Templar, you can take those CAT scans and they can help you out. You're technically talking to a guy who's actually been mistaken to have Asperger's here. Who, in the process, here's the thing. I went to 3 doctors who gave me, technically, a different CAT scan. And here's the thing. All those brain scans of my head, here's the thing. They all show different results. In other words, you can't just trust a CAT scan. The human brain is, well, developmental. You can't just, well, mark somebody with it. But here's the messed up thing, though. Many times over, many of these so-called autism scans are not actually placed on adults. Mainly on children. Young children as far as being a toddler. And here's the thing, even Asperger did this most of the time on children. And as well, he even stated that the children that does not actually act well, or as well does not act like a proper German child should, is labeled with autism. And I am not kidding, because actually this is actually really messed up. There was known as the autism scare rule. This type of rule system was really messed up, in which if you didn't follow these direct rules in general, like such as dress in attire, always tuck in your pants, or something. In the process, you technically were labeled with autism. You see my point here, right? In fact, even during the late 90s, even heavy metal was actually viewed as autism music, just because they saw people banging their heads. You see my point here, right? This is really stupid, and unfortunately, many times over, many physicians are even actually still stating these bullcrap theories. Just because they don't like the music, just because they don't like the person, just because they don't like their people's country, or as well, just because they view the person inferior. And unfortunately, this is still going on. you can see why many times over we kind of got rid of many autisms, but unfortunately, because we got rid of them, we kind of got something else to replace them with. Now, don't get me wrong, as I stated, there is real autism out there, but the thing is, to find it is like finding a needle in a haystack. In other words, you can't technically just pick out the whole haystack. That's like doing broad brush strokes on everything. Because labeling somebody is like, well, it's like this. If I was to take, say, one said apple from, say, an orchard, well, actually, I wouldn't say an orchard, but I would technically say maybe an orange, but you get the point. If I had to take an apple from an apple tree and another apple from an apple tree, and here's the thing, if I had to compare them both by taste, texture, or look, here's the thing, they're all different. In other words, view those as a human mind. But here's the thing, that so-called worm infection, that's known as the autism infection. In fact, this was actually even stated by none other than a physician known as Hannes Agreti. Hannes Agreti was an Italian who actually went as far as to even get his book published both in the States and including all around Europe and Asia. And here's the thing, he actually even disses off Hans Asperger and including many other people that were actually from the Victorian and Nazi eras. Unfortunately, though, we kind of still believe this bullshit because many parts over, many idiotic physicians didn't read his book. And here's the thing, this is a world-known physician in Italy who pretty much actually studied autism from its point A to point B, or as well from every point in era, in which he actually notices that nobody around this is actually labeled the best form of autism. Now, I can hear you guys already, but Templar, I'm a physician, and I know what I've read. Yeah, you're technically reading bullshit from a Victorian and a Nazi scientist. Get my point? You don't just read something from racial people who pretty much don't understand the human mind. Especially if it's from a Victorian who pretty much, if they actually viewed somebody having any form of autism, they would even go as far as they thought the remedy would actually be to dunk somebody in extremely freezing cold water. In doing so, this damaged the human mind. And in doing so, it's kind of even seen on a movie known as The Wolfman, which is probably a good horror flick, but you get to my point of how stupid the Victorians were. And unfortunately, even the Nazis were really stupid for believing this bullshit theory of autism, of how it is everywhere. In fact, autism scares were so inept, or technically so rare, that it was like, why bother even going to a physician? It's like trying to actually just labeling yourself with autism. And unfortunately, here's the thing. Most of the time, such as autism, such as Asperger's, has even been going as far as being labeled as a false type of autism. And unfortunately, many people are still labeled to be autistic just because they have Asperger's, when in truth, that's this labeling human system. In other words, it's like this. If you're technically still acting like this, like, well, a child, here's the thing, that's probably because he probably still is a child. But here's the thing though, many times over, I don't even put that I have autism whenever I go to, well, actually get myself a job. Mainly because of the fact I don't want to end up getting fired right off the first second. Because of the fact all this stuff about autism is fake. And unfortunately, we're still paying the price for it. But unfortunately, there is real autism out there. But unfortunately, many physicians don't study it. In other words, if you guys are actually even a physician, I advise you guys to actually look up real autism before you actually mistaken people with fake autism. Because otherwise, you're going to end up really pissing off thousands of people. And unfortunately, many Americans even went as far as to attack their former doctor, who actually labeled their kid with autism. You see my point here, right? It's just going to cause massive havoc. But yes, now, if you guys are wanting to actually me to have this word spread out, let me know in the comments below. Also, please actually share this with friends, family members, as well as your teachers, just to get them to acknowledge the fact that autism is a fake thing. Most of the time, a fake thing that it is technically hard to understand. And as well, if you're going to end up mistaking one guy with autism and the other guy with autism, here's the thing, you're going to end up causing problems. In other words, don't just throw a kid inside a, well, class full of other kids just because he's supposed to be labeled autistic. In other words, share this, and as well, I will leave videos down below on the type of scenes I told you about, so that way you guys can understand the bullshit theories of our modern science. But as well, guys, like, subscribe, comment, and as well, hit that bell button for notifications to help the channel grow. Anyways, guys, I will also be talking about other messed up things in history very weird soon. And as well, guys, don't take this personally, but you understand that I had to talk about this for everyone's sake. Anyways, guys, this has been Templar. Have a good day.